Welcome back to Team FastEddy. Today we're going to show you how to fill and to bleed your shock absorber off of a Losi 5ive-T. To remove the shocks is very simple, and we just wanted to point out one small thing that you need to be aware of. On both the front and the back, on the left hand side, on the rear, you're going to see that the screw that holds the shock onto the A-arm is silver on one side and it is black on the other. The silver is a reverse thread, so you want to make sure that it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, not on a Losi. So let's go. On this side is righty-tighty, on this side is lefty-loosey. So you're going to want to make sure you turn the silver screw in the opposite direction. Otherwise you're either going to strip the head of the screw out, or you're going to strip out the plastic on your A-arms while you're removing it. So go ahead and remove your shock, and we're going to do that off camera, and then we're going to show you simply how to fill and bleed the shock. We will at some point have another video on how to rebuild the shock absorbers, but at this point we just want to show you how to bleed them, because when you do get them new, 3 of my shocks were in perfect shape, but one of them was a little bit light on fluid and it did have to be rebled. So I want to show you how to do that. So relax, kick back, let me get this shock off, and we're going to start bleeding. Alright, we've gone ahead and removed the shock. I just wanted to show you this little insert here that I was talking about. You can see it's a black insert in there, and they do fall out. So make sure that you don't lose that. Set it aside so that you can put it back in later. Alright, this is the shock. What we're going to want to do is to test the shock first to make sure that it actually does need to be refilled and bled. So what we're going to want to do to test the shock is to take the spring off. You do have a perch that's on the bottom here, which does need to come off, and what I like to do is just hold the shock on something firm, press down on the spring, and then at that point you can take the perch off, and then the spring will come off. That leaves us with the shock. To test the shock, it is actually pretty simple. You're going to want to push up and down on the shaft, and it should be smooth all the way up and all the way down. This particular one is low on fluid, and I can feel it because there's a dead spot at the top where there is no resistance as compared to the resistance that's down below. And what that's telling me is that there's not enough fluid in the shock, and that the inside piston is hitting just air, and it's allowing at the top of its stroke a lot of free play. What will eventually happen is, as that starts mixing up the fluid in the air, it'll froth and you won't get the consistency out of the shock that you want. So we're going to go ahead and refill it. You're going to need 2 items. You don't have to have them, but they sure come in handy, and that is the wheel wrench that came with your 5. We're very simply going to slip the shaft down and then over this hex area here, which is the same size, and that's holds that. And then we're going to use this little wrench here and slip the top over like this and hold on to it, and that's going to allow us to open up the lid and later on also to put it on. Okay, so now that we have this opened up, I'm going to get out my Team FastEddy shock building stand, and we're going to open up the shock, take the cap off, set it aside. Now you're going to notice there's a little plastic bladder in here, and it's going to have an R on it because that is a rear. So if you ever need to order, or you're not quite sure which bladder goes back into which shock, that one is marked R for the rear. As we take this bladder out, you can very plainly see on the inside that there's just not enough fluid in there, and that there is air. So we have 2 choices right now. If you're going to completely rebuild the shock or you want to change the fluid out, go ahead and dump the old fluid out and we can put all brand new in. However, looking at this particular fluid that's in here, we can still see that it's nice and clean. So we're not going to change it out, we're just going to top it off. If it's extremely dirty or gritty or brown or black color in there, you're going to want to clean the shock out and start with new fluid. Okay, so looking at the fluid, and I know it's really hard to tell on camera, but there's a lot of air in the fluid. We're going to want to put this into a stand, find something to hold it, let it sit for a while, and allow the air bubbles to completely come out of the fluid. If you are rebuilding the shock completely or replacing it with all new oil, you're going to dump the old oil out and refill it like we're going to do later, but you're going to want to pump the shaft to allow the trapped air underneath the piston to come out. So you're very simply going to lift up on the shaft about halfway and then pull down on it, and you're going to see bubbles rising up through the fluid as you look in there. Once you do that, you're going to let it set, and again, maybe in a couple of minutes, very slowly push that up and give it a quick pull down and allow the air bubbles to come out. You're going to let it rest a couple of minutes in between each pull so that you can make sure that all of the air bubbles are coming out. As soon as the liquid is completely clear and you can see down through there and there's no air bubbles, that's when we're going to go ahead and top it off and put the bladders back in and bleed it. So, going to let this sit for a while because the foam in there is froth and we want it to be clear. We're going to let the air rise out. Alright, the shock's been sitting for me for about a half an hour now. The majority of all the air bubbles are out and the shock oil looks nice and clean and transparent. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to top it off. We're going to go ahead and use the Losi 30 weight on this because that's what they come with. And I'm going to add fluid in until it comes to within about a 1/16 of an inch from the top of the shock. Let's see if we can show you this on camera. See if you can get a view down in there. About a 1/16 of an inch from the top. Basically, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be laying the bladder back in. If you look at the bladder has some depth to it. So the outer portion ring is going to lay on the top, and the curved portion is going to go down inside the shock. And what we're going to try to do as we put this in is to eliminate all of the air out of the shock. So I'm actually going to put a little bit more in. I'd rather have too much in there than not enough, because as we put the bladder in, the excess will be eliminated. I like to have a little paper towel handy here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop this down on there and just kind of let it settle in. You're going to see that this is actually floating because there's additional fluid in there that needs to come out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lift up one corner of this and kind of roll it down, and then you can see the excess fluid come out over on this side. Believe it or not, that's about all there is to bleeding the shock. What I do like to do at that point is to just kind of stick my finger on there and move it around. Maybe just grab up the corner and see if I can't burp any more air out of there until that seal, you can actually feel it stick to the shock body. Now all the air is out. You also want to make sure that there's no oil or a very minimal amount of oil. You don't want it to pool on top of that bladder. At this point, we're going to go ahead and put our top back on. You need to be careful that you don't shift the bladder around as you put it back on. So try to put it on just as straight as possible. You might want to turn a little bit in the opposite direction until you feel that thread hit. And then go ahead and screw the top back on. Now, one thing that you can notice as well is there's a bleeder hole. Sometimes you can get an amount of fluid up in there as you're putting it on, and you can see some little bubbles start to come through on there now, which is just fine. If you get a solid stream of fluid out, you've done something wrong, but it is possible to get some little bubbles or nothing at all. So I'm just going to make that hand tight. I'm going to go ahead and wipe off any of the fluid that's in there. And there's going to be some around, but it's not going to be that messy. We'll go ahead and grab our tools again, and we're going to tighten up the top. Again, you can use different tools if you want, but the Losi tools work just fine. I'm going to put that on there. I'm going to go ahead and snug it up nice and tight. We don't need to break it, but we want it snugged up. The other thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you're not pinching any kind of material underneath there. Sometimes that bladder can come out and it can get pinched. Let's go ahead and test the shock now to make sure that it is fully up to the top and operating smoothly, again just like we did before. And it's possible, and it should actually start to extend out a little bit as it's properly filled. You need to be able to make sure that you can push the shaft all the way up, and when you let go it should come back down. And what that's doing is as you push it up, that bladder is inverting, and when you let go, the pressure of that bladder is coming back down. So as you're using your shock, that bladder's actually in there doing this number, compensating for the fluid. Okay, now we're nice and smooth up, nice and smooth down. Let's go ahead and check and make sure that our boot is properly seated at the top. I've noticed that my boot is actually ripped a little bit here, so I'm going to have to order some in. I don't seem to have any spares, but we're going to want to replace that, and it helps keep the dirt out of the shaft. The other thing we're going to want to do is pull the boot up over the shock end, and believe it or not, it's not that easy of a thing to do because it likes to get folded over, but you do want to make sure that that gets pulled up over the shock end, just like so. As we're putting this back together, we want to keep in mind, and you can see that on the shock shaft there's a additional piece of plastic on one side here. You can see it in between my fingers, and it's not on the other places. As we put the perch back on, we're going to want to make sure that that portion lines up with the slot that's in the perch as we put it back on. Not too much really to worry about, so let's put the spring back on. Going to hold that down. Going to line that little extra piece of plastic up with the notch on the perch. Set the perch back on, and we're ready to go. Very, very easy to bleed. And as you're putting it back on, again, remember that the silver screw is a reverse thread on the left-hand side of the rear car. I want to thank you for stopping by, Team FastEddy. There's all sorts of tutorials just like this located on my YouTube channel. There's literally hundreds of them, along with product reviews. And that's at youtube.com/Team FastEddy, and you can see the address at the end of the video. Also, I can be found at RC Large Scale Forums. Beautiful forum for everything large scale. So come on by and join the community, and you can see all sorts of exclusive content, not only by myself, but by many of the other manufacturers in the large scale industry. So thanks for stopping by, Team FastEddy. Now, go out and have some fun.